And welcome to Django Level 4. We've learned a lot so far, and yet there is still so much more that Django can offer you with its pre-built-in tools. And in Django Level 4, we're going to be focusing on learning a lot more about templates and template tagging. So far, we've only used templates as a way of injecting simple pieces into our HTML files, and maybe doing simple operations like a for loop through stuff in our database or in our models and bringing it into the HTML. But templates are actually capable of a lot more than that. For example, so far we've been manually creating everything individually for each HTML file of our web application or web page. However, we can actually use templates to have a base template and inherit that template in the HTML files. This saves you a lot of time and will help create a unified look and feel across every page of your website. And then templates can also be used to solve issues with relative paths and working with other variables. So for instance, templates can be used to help solve issues by avoiding hard-coded URL paths, and they can also come with built-in filter capabilities, so you can adjust variables on the actual individual page of a particular view. Okay, let's get started on all these topics about templates by first starting out with relative URLs and how we can use templates to solve those issues. Thanks, and I'll see you at the next lecture. Welcome to Relative URLs with Templates. In this lecture, we'll discuss how to use template tagging to create relative URL calls, and we'll also have a quick side discussion on future releases of Django. Let's get started. As we mentioned, so far when we've had to use an anchor tag with an href, we've usually passed in a hard-coded path to the file, meaning we either pass in the entire file path to actually get to the HTML file, or we write a file path to the actual view. In general, this is poor practice if we want our Django project to work on any system and be scalable. We want to really focus on relative file paths, not hard-coded ones. In this lecture and the next one, we will show you how to use various methods to pass relative URLs with template tags. And at the end, we're going to show you the preferred method that will be the main method used when future versions of Django are released. Let's talk about, for a second, a quick side note on Django and future releases, since we are going to be focusing that on the end of this lecture. Django in general has a really good roadmap for future releases, and every 2 years, they release what is known as an LTS, or long-term support version of Django, with support guaranteed of at least 3 years. Now, for a lot of people who work at enterprise companies, long-term support usually means something like 10 years, not just 3 years. But please keep in mind that Django is an open source project. It's really just a bunch of volunteers donating their time. So 3 years is a pretty long-term support for such an open source project. But definitely check out the release notes and documentation on roadmaps for Django to get a better idea and a better understanding of what the future of Django really looks like. And as a quick note, usually new releases involve better features and easier methods. They're not huge paradigm shifts in the way you actually work with Django and the views, the models, the templates, etc. So think of it more as improvements in regards to what you can expect in future releases of Django. Don't be nervous or worried that all the knowledge you're learning right now is suddenly going to vanish with the next release. It really usually doesn't work that way. Okay, so back to the topic at hand. How can we replace a hard-coded URL path in an href with a URL template instead? Let's see a few examples. Alright, so we can easily fix that problem with the use of URLs in our templates. So for example, usually you may have something that looks like that first darker example where you have href basic app / thank you and then thanks. So that's just the anchor tag itself. If you want to use template tags, you can change that to look like this. You have the template tag with the %signs, you have the keyword URL inside of that, and then in usually single quotes, you have the actual name, where you have name is equal to thank you in the urls.py file of your application. That's one way to do this. You could also just directly reference the view itself. So for example, in the previous method, we were referencing the name in the urls.py file, but you could also do this. If you have an href and an anchor tag, like basic app / thank you, you could just change that to be in a URL template tag in single quotes that says basic app.views.thank you. And that will go to the basic app, find the view for thank you, and then return that link so that when you click on thanks, or whatever that text in the anchor tag happens to be on your web page, it will take you to that view. However, this method is actually eventually going to go away with Django 2.0 in the future. At this point in time, at the recording of this lecture, we're right now the latest release is Django 1.10. The next one is going to be 1.11, and after that, we should see Django 2.0 further along. That's about 1.5 to 2 years away from being released at this point in time, but let's focus on how we can actually future-proof our method, since that method's going to work right now, and in fact, I believe it's the better and simpler method to understand. So the suggested and most future-proof method is to do all of this with the urls.py file. So inside the urls.py file, you add in the variable app_name. You then set this variable equal to a string that is the same name as your application name. And so this is currently the best way to use URL templates. This most future-proof example, and I believe the simplest example of the way to use this, looks like this. You're going to be changing something that looks like href equal to basic app / thank you to change to look like this. Your URL template tagging, and then in quotes, the name of your application, colon, and then the name of that view. And remember that this method requires the app name variable to be created inside the urls.py file. Now, one quick note. So far, we've really only been working with a single application Django project. And so you might be thinking, what's the whole point of all this URL template tagging, since it's quite obvious to me what view matches with what application. I only have one application. It should be simple enough, and I don't have to worry about the relative URL.py files. Well, later on, especially with the clone projects, we're going to be building out multi-application Django projects. So a single project with multiple applications and have things separated as applications. And with this sort of methodology, the URL template tagging becomes really important and really helps you have a clear understanding and clear pathways to your relative URL links. So keep in mind, everything we're talking about here is kind of overkill for a single application project, but in the real world, we're going to have multi-application projects. So that's where this really comes in handy. All right, so again, using templates for relative URLs, big help for multi-applications. Let's work through a basic example in the next lecture. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you there. To the URLs with Templates Code Examples lecture. In this lecture, we're going to be coding through everything we just discussed in the previous lecture. As a quick note, the project for this lecture and the project for the entire section can be found under the Django Level-4 folder in your notes, and it's called Template Project. Alright, let's get started. I'm going to start the project entirely from scratch in Atom Text Editor. I think it's always great practice to get through the workflow of starting up your project, setting up your settings.py file, etc. You can skip ahead if you don't want to go through that process, if you just want to meet me at where you would start at the template project. Okay, let's hop over to Atom Editor and get started. Alright, so I have a folder called Django Level-4 that is totally empty right now. What I'm going to do is, after setting up my virtual environment, that's optional, of course, I'm going to cd into it. So we'll say cd into Django Level-4. And then I'm going to say Django-admin start project. And then we'll call this project learning_templates, since that's going to be what we're doing in this section of the course, learning templates. So I'll hit enter, make sure that all sets up automatically. And then after that, we'll also set up our basic application. This will just be a one application project. Okay, so I can see here I have learning_templates ready to go. So then again, what I'm going to do is say cd into the learning templates, and then I'm going to say Django-admin start app, and we'll just call this basic_app. Hit enter, and that creates our application. Perfect. We have basic app and learning templates, and inside of this, I'm also going to create a new folder called templates, and then inside of that, let's create another folder that matches the name with our application. In this case, it's basic app. Perfect. Now let's go to settings.py and make sure that our settings is aware of our templates directory and the fact that we have a basic application here. So as always, we come here and set up template_dir equal to os.path.join, and then I join my base directory with templates. And hopefully this starts to feel really natural to you. You don't have to keep looking this up. I know when I was first starting out, I constantly had to look up this exact line of code, but as you get used to starting the project over and over again, this becomes really natural to you. Again, installed apps, we want to make sure our application is in there. So we say basic app, save that. And then coming down to our actual templates, let's add in our templates directory. And then what we're going to do is say template dir, save that. And that should be all we need to do for now. You can always mess around with this other stuff later. Okay, so let's come back to basic app. And what we're going to be discussing here is how to use those relative URLs. In order to actually show all that, though, we need a couple of HTML files that we're actually going to be linking to. So under templates, under basic app, let's create a couple of files. We'll say create base.html, and we're actually not going to do anything with this file for now. We'll do that in a subsequent lecture, but we'll keep it in for now. We'll also create a new file called index.html. That'll be our home page. And then again, under basic app, we'll create another file, and we'll call this other.html. And this will just be a quote-unquote other page to link to using the relative URLs. And then finally, let's create a page that's actually going to have all our information about relative URL templates. So you can call this file whatever you want. I'm going to give it a really obvious name so I understand what it's about. I'll call it relative underscore URL underscore templates.html. A really long, ugly name, but that way there's no mistake of what's going on in this HTML file. Okay, so I'm going to work with everything right now but base HTML. You can feel free to close base HTML. We'll talk about this file again when we talk about template inheritance. And then we can close our settings.py file. Don't need the welcome guide. So relative URL templates, save that. Other, let's put in some HTML code, save that. And then index HTML, save that. Okay, so in all of this, let's add a heading in. That way, once we actually visit the page with Django, we know what's going on. So we'll say, welcome to index. Save that. In other, I'm going to make a heading 1 that says, welcome to other. And then relative URL templates, we'll say h1, welcome to relative URL templates. And this is where we're actually going to be messing around with those template tags that we just learned about in the previous lecture. To actually show all these pages, though, we need to set up the views. So let's come to our basic app, come to views.py, and set that all up. So again, all we're going to be using is the render function. These are going to be really simple views. We're not creating any forms or any models. So we're just essentially going to be returning the actual pages. We'll say def index, take in that request, and then I'm going to return render, pass in that actual request for the page, and then just a path to it under templates. So under templates, all of these are under the basic app folder. And then for the index page, it's just index.html. And we're going to do a really similar thing for the other one. So for the other page, again, this is kind of a general name. So maybe when you're creating your own web applications, don't create such a general render, or excuse me, such a general other page. It's kind of probably a bad name for it. And then we'll say basic app / other.html. And then the other view, we'll just call it relative. And this is going to be the page that has those examples of how to actually create relative paths. So we'll say return render, pass in the request, and then pass in this case, basic app / and that kind of ugly name. It was relative URL templates.html. Okay, save that, and now we have our views ready to go. Now we need to set up our URLs to actually point to these views. And this is where we have to make sure we set up the URLs correctly to actually use the template tagging correctly. So let's start off with the URL for the project itself. So coming to learning_templates, remember that's the name of our project, we'll come to the urls.py file, scroll all the way down, and here we can see the link to the admin page. Let's create the links to the other pages. So that means we need to import the views from our application. So we'll say from our basic app, import views. And then what I'm going to do here is set up the actual import. So we'll call URL, and then I need to use regular expressions here. We'll say URL $$, and I'm just going to pass in for the index page views.index, and then give it the name index. So remember, that's one way we could do this. If you want kind of a subdirectory, so for instance, that URL configuration, we can do something like this. URL, regular expression, caret, and let's say anything that starts with basic app /. And then we'll call include, and we'll say basic app.urls. All right, save that. So again, just to reiterate what this is doing with URL patterns, when we use this function views, that means we're directly calling it from the function. So using this regular expression, if someone just comes to your domain page, that's that 127.00/8000, it'll just say, okay, go to views, grab the index, and show it to this person on the home page. Then if someone goes to our web page /basic app, so again, caret symbol is anything before that /basic app, and then the name of the actual page or the view, such as basic app /relative or basic app /other, basic app etc. Then we tell it, okay, go to the basic app.urls page for the subsequent views to show, or the subsequent mapping of the URLs, which means we come over here to our basic app right-click on the basic app folder, create a new file called urls.py. And now we have the urls.py file for our application. And this is where we need to make sure we set stuff up correctly. There's going to be a namespace that we need to set up. So right now, inside your application, you're going to say from Django.conf for configuration.urls, import URL. And then we're also going to need to say from, and this is where you have many options. You can just say from.import views. I just from habit like to say from basic app import views. Definitely check the PEP 8 on what your official styling should be, but I like doing this from a teaching perspective just because it's really clear where this views is coming from instead of saying the dot. So again, some of my styling here is really tuned more towards teaching this topic versus what you would actually do for a full-on project. All right, so this is what I was referring to as far as like setting that namespace. Whenever you're going to be using template tagging, so this is for template tagging, what we need to do, just to zoom in here, is set a variable name, a global name called app_name. And Django is going to automatically look for this. And then you need to set this equal to whatever the name of your application is. So app name is equal to basic app as a string. And this is what's going to allow us to use that template tagging to actually tell Django, okay, look under the basic app and then find the URL that matches. And then we have our URL patterns list here. And this is where I can say URL, and we'll use regular expressions again. And we'll say for relative slash, and then we can say $ for anything after relative. We will call views.relative. And we can give it the name equal to relative. And let's create another view, or excuse me, another URL link for the other view. That other.html page. So slash $ here. And we can say views.other name is equal to other. All right, save that. So basically what this is saying is, okay, if you're coming to your project page and you see something that says homepage domain.com/basic_app/, then you're going to come over here, go to basic app URLs, and then say, okay, domain name.com/basic_app/relative gives you the relative view. Domain name.com/basic_app/other comes and gives you the other view. And later on when we're dealing with clones, we'll talk about how to continue on with regular expressions here to show pages for specific users and all that kind of stuff. But right now, just focusing on templates and the URL templates. Okay, so this should all be set up. Now let's come over here to our relative_URL_templates.html, and let's show you how to actually implement those templates, everything we've been talking about, but haven't shown yet. So we'll call an anchor tag here. And the big part of an anchor tag is the href, where you actually are telling it to go to a file. And we've seen before that we usually do something like this, basic app /other.html, and then we say this links to the other page, or something like that. But we want to replace this so that it's relative, and we don't have this actual pathway here. And that it's relative to the actual application, so Django can find it. So since we're going to be inputting actual, essentially tags and code, we use the % here for the template, and then we use the keyword URL. And then inside of this, inside of single quotes, is the name of that application. So we'll say basic app, colon, and then that name of what you want to show. So if we come back to, remember, urls.py file, I have app name basic app. This basic app is what needs to match over here. That's where this is from. Basic app, it's not from the folder name, it's from this app name right here. And then this other name is what we're going to look for the second part of this. So we'll say other. And that's all you need to do for the URL template tagging. And this is the way it's going to be used in the future for Django 2.0. The other ways will eventually go away, and this is going to be the way of the future. And obviously you can see that it's actually pretty simple. The key thing to note here is the naming convention. So you need to set up an app name inside your application's urls.py file. That's the first part of this, on the left-hand side of this colon. And on the right-hand side of the colon is the name it looks for. So over here on urls.py, that's the name it's looking for. Okay, so we will save that. And let's see if this all worked to make sure I didn't forget anything. I'm going to say under learning templates, Python, manage.py, and I will say run server. And let's hope this all worked out and we don't have to debug anything. Okay, looks like I'm forgetting something. And I forgot to import include. Okay, so it says here, include is not defined, so I just come back to urls.py. Over here, forgot to do this, include. Save that. Let's try it again. All right, now it looks like we are getting something running, so let's copy this, bring in the browser, see if it works. So far, so good. It looks like it says welcome to index. Now it's time to really test this out. I'm going to go to basic_app/relative, hit enter, and now it says welcome to the relative URL templates. And remember, we have to use this /basicapp/relative because that's what we're doing in the project urls.py file. In the project urls.py file, I'm saying right here, if something starts with basic app, go to basicapp.urls to get the next piece of it. And then in basic app URLs, I'm saying, okay, if it says basic app/relative, then bring back that relative view, which is the views.relative, which links to this HTML file. Okay, so let's see if this template tag actually worked for the link. Coming back to the browser, here it is again. So it says here, the other page, let's hit the link, and it says welcome to other. Perfect. And this we can see right here is basic app/other. And that's what you have to do for URL template tagging. It may have seemed like a complicated process at first, but it's really actually not so bad. All you had to do was set up that app namespace and then set up the name, set up the URL mapping, and you're good to go basically. Now you can easily call the URL template tags. Okay, so we covered the very basics of how to use URL template tagging. Let's show a few more examples for sites or pages that you typically don't have within your own custom application. Things like the index page or things like the admin page. But a quick note before we get started on that, a really common bug or error that will be a head scratcher is if you accidentally leave an extra line here in the string, either before you have this or after you have that. What happens is Django ends up looking for space basic app as a string instead of just basic app as a string, or they use the name other blank or a space there. So make sure that these actual quotes end up touching that. That can be a really tricky error to solve because when it prints it out, it says, oh, I can't find the name other. And then you'll look over here on urls.py and you say, no, I really do have the name other. What's going on here? So definitely be careful with this one. That's a really common error and it happens to me sometimes and it's a big head scratcher. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, let's move along to show you how you could add something like the admin page as a anchor tag. So we'll say href %, and then for this, again, you call URL. And in this case, you're going to call admin index. So basically what's going on is if you go to settings.py in your project, you'll notice that not only is your basic app a application, but also django.contrib.admin. And we don't actually have that open, but if you wanted to, you could open up the Django source code or just check out the application admin. That's something that always gets imported as an installed application. But inside of that, in its own urls.py file, there is an admin application with an index named view that it will take you to. Something to note here is that in order for this to work, sometimes you have to make the migration just because admin wants it that way. So we can go ahead and do that. So we can say Python manage.py migrate, hit enter. It will run all the migrations for everything that's a default application. And then we can actually say Python manage.py run server, hit enter, and then we can bring in the browser page. And here I have it on welcome to index, but let's take it to basic app/relative. And now I actually forgot to put some text in there to the anchor tag. So let me do that first. So if you notice, I have my anchor tag, but I forgot to put text in there. So let's bring that in. And let's make this a link to, if I come here, link to admin. And we'll save that. See if that gets updated as I refresh the page. Okay, so I just refreshed the page over here. You can see I refreshed it, and now it says link to admin. So now if I click link to admin, it takes me to the admin page. So we can expand on that, and we see Django administration, username, and password. I can hit back. If I hit the other page, it takes me to the other page. Okay, let me show you one more example of how to get to the index page, which is also a little different because it's not in your own application. I'll move this aside, show it to you here. For this, it's actually even simpler. All you have to do is create an anchor tag, and the href, again, it's the block, but in this case, it's URL, and just straight up index. Again, make sure that there's no spaces before or after index in that string. So we can save that, and let's say link to index. I'm going to refresh my page, and it says, okay, welcome to other. Let's go back here, refresh this, and it says the other page, link to admin, link to index, and there's my index page. Okay, so those are three main examples that you're going to be using: your own application view, the admin index view, and then just the home view. And again, keep in mind with these spaces, that could really trip you up. But hopefully you saw how this is a pretty simple process. If you have any questions, feel free to post to the Q&A forums. I'm always happy to help out, but this is a great way to use relative URL and the power of templates in your Django project. I'll see you at the next lecture. Lecture on template inheritance. Let's learn how we can use Django template inheritance to practice dry coding principles. Dry standing for don't repeat yourself. Template inheritance allows us to create a base template we can inherit from. Earlier, we saw that we created a base.html file, but left it blank. In this lecture, we're going to explain what we're going to be using it for, and in the next lecture, we'll actually code out through the example. Template inheritance saves us a lot of repetitive work, and it makes it much easier to maintain the same base look and feel across our entire website. For example, if we wanted a navbar at the top of our page, it wouldn't make sense to have to continually have the same navbar HTML code in each individual .html file. Before this lecture, we used to have the same navbar HTML code over and over again if we wanted to extend it to every page in our Django project. Granted, we haven't actually done that at all yet, but we would have had to do that given what we know so far. So instead of doing that, we can actually set it to the base.html file and inherit it using template inheritance. This idea is also sometimes known as template extending, as in extending the base.html file to other .html files. The inheritance doesn't need to just be limited to one base.html file. You can extend multiple templates. Before you begin any Django project, it's always a good idea to sketch out the main idea and organization by hand. This will help you realize what can be used for template inheritance and what applications you should create. Planning out your project in this manner will really give you a good idea of what code is going to be constantly reused, so you can put that into your base.html file. Okay, so what are the main steps for inheritance? It's actually pretty simple. First, you find the repetitive parts of your project, things like a navbar, or a picture, or a brand that you're going to see on most of the pages. Then, you create a base template of those repetitive parts, such as the navbar. Then, you set particular tags in the base template, and we'll show those tags in just a second. Once you've done that, you extend and call those tags anywhere else in those other HTML files that are not the base.html file. So what does this actually look like? Well, on the left-hand side, we have that base.html file. This is the file that's going to have things like links to your JavaScript, your CSS, your Bootstrap, a bunch of HTML, things like navbars, etc., stuff that you want to inherit onto the other pages. Then, inside the body, stuff that you don't want on every single page, you have these two main tags, and that's the block tag with the name of the block, in this case it's the body block, and then you have the end block tag. Then you can have some more footer HTML outside of that. And in that left-hand side base.html file, basically what this is saying is everything outside of that is going to be inherited in the other file. So we can see here we have some other HTML file, and we want to make sure that the first line is always doc type HTML. After that, you can call the extends, and then actually call the path to your base.html file. And then after that, you call block body underscore block that matches the name in your base.html file, and then you have your HTML that's specific to this other.html file, stuff that wasn't in the base.html. Then, once you're done with that, you call end block. So you can see it's kind of the reverse or opposite. On the left-hand side, you see everything outside of that is going to be passed in when we extend it to the right-hand side. And on the right-hand side, everything inside those body blocks is going to be put into the base.html, or extended with the base.html. Okay. So let's actually walk through a basic example of this template inheritance. It's actually a really easy and smooth process. And once you start using template inheritance, it's actually going to make it much easier to read HTML files across your web page, because you're going to get rid of all this junk repetitive code like the navbar. That will all go to your base.html file. Okay, thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next lecture. To the template inheritance code examples lecture, where we're going to be coding through the topics we just previously discussed for template inheritance. Let's hop over to the editor and get started. Alright, so here I am using the learning_templates project we created in the previous coding lecture for this section of the course. Remember that we created this base.html file. Let's show you how you can create some typical looking base.html code and then use it and extend it to the other HTML files we have in this application, such as this index file, other HTML, and then even the relative URL template. Okay, so in all HTML files, you always want to have this line of code be first, and it's doctype HTML. So that always needs to come first in an HTML file. And you can get it easily just by typing HTML and hitting enter. That will always be the first line. No matter what kind of template tags you're using, again, this should always be on line number 1. Okay, so let's make sure that we have Bootstrap linked across our entire website. The way to do this easily is instead of having that link in every single .html file, we just put it in the base.html file. I'm going to copy and paste this. You can do it either from the notes or from getbootstrap.com. Okay, so there's the link to Bootstrap. There's my href to it. And again, this href could also be a link to a local file underneath templates. You could have CSS and then link it to Bootstrap locally. It's really up to you whether you want to link it online or link it locally. It's a little faster if you link it locally, especially when you begin to deploy your projects. Plus, you can always make sure that you're not dependent on someone else hosting this. All right, now inside this body, let's create a navigation bar. So we do this by calling nav, and I'm going to pass in the classes. And I don't have these memorized. I'm just copy and pasting these from the notes and also from the Bootstrap documentation. So I would not expect you to just knowingly know all the classes like I'm typing them here. So feel free to just copy and paste from the notes or type along with me. But the class for the navbar that I'm using is navbar space, navbar default, and then navbar static top. And then I'm going to put this that comes next inside of a container class. And then we'll have an unordered list, and this is the stuff that's actually inside that navbar. So we'll give this unordered list a class of nav space navbar dash nav. And then inside this ordered list, I'm going to have list items. They'll be anchor tags, and they're going to link to different parts of the page. But these are going to have a class of, and this first one is going to be the actual brand page. So navbar dash brand. And pretty much this always takes you back to the home page. So we won't mess around with the H references right now. We'll set up the template inheritance first, and then we'll come back and review how to do template URLs with these href tags. But inside of this anchor tag, I'm just going to say brand, save that. And then let's create another list item, another anchor tag, and let's actually, instead of putting this class in the list item, let's put it inside the anchor tag. So it's a little cleaner. There we go. And then this anchor tag is also going to have a class, and this class is going to be equal to a navbar dash link class. And we'll have this link to the admin page. And let's copy and paste this. Create one more. And what we're going to do here is have this link to the other page. Remember, we have that other.html file. Okay, so that all goes inside this container div, and all of that is going inside this navbar. Perfect. And then since we're using Bootstrap, what would be nice is making sure anything else I put in the body is already inside a container, so I don't need to call that. So what I'm going to do is create a div tag that says container. And again, all this sort of styling and classing, that's really going to be up to you when you're creating your own project, what you think looks good. You test it out on mobile devices, on tablets, see what else looks good, etc. So definitely don't take this as absolutely 100% must do. Really, all of this stuff at a certain point becomes your own personal choice and personal styling, depending on what your website's going to be used for. Okay, so right now I have everything that I want to display across every single page. I want every single page on my website to have this navbar and have its body contained in a container and have the link to Bootstrap, which means I need to set up my actual template tags that will define this. So we'll call this block body underscore block. And then we'll write a comment here. Anything outside of this will be inherited if you extend. Typically you won't have this comment, but I'm just typing it in there so you can get an idea. And then finally we want to end the block. So we use end block for this. And if you install some Django plugins for Atom text editor, a lot of the stuff is syntax highlighted and done automatically for you. Okay. So basically what we're saying here is everything outside of this is going to be inherited when we call extend on it. So let's actually practice that. So I will come to my other.html file, and this is where it gets really cool. Right now, I have a bunch of stuff in this HTML file. But really the only thing that's unique here is the fact that it says welcome to other. So all I need to do is make sure that the doc type HTML code is there. I can delete everything else and then just extend my template. So I will say up here on the second line, extends, and then pass in the file path to that template, which is under templates, and then I call basic app / base.html. And so you note now that I could have various template files as my base template, even across different applications across the templates folder, and I just need to make sure that I call the right one and I extend the right one. That way you're not just limited to the one base.html. Okay, so once we've done the extension there, what I do is call this tag. I call block, body block, and this matches basically what I had in base.html. That's this guy. But now, instead of everything being outside, everything's going to be inside. So this says welcome to other, and then let's say this is an example of template inheritance. And then finally, I'm going to close this off with an end block. And that's it. Now this other.html file is ready to go. Key things to note here is doc type, always line number 1. Then I call the extends on wherever base.html file I'm looking for. Then I call block, the body block, and then whatever content you want there, and then you can end the block. And that's basically it. You can actually see that now the template tags, when they were confusing at first when we were first starting to learn Django, now they actually look way cleaner and way more readable than all the other HTML junk we had before. And this is really the power behind template inheritance. So let's do this on another page. For example, our home page, which is index.html. So again, I can just get rid of all this other HTML code since that's already taken care of for me. I have doc type HTML. I need to extend from my actual base.html file. So I say extends, and then in quotes where it is under the templates file, which in this case it's basic app / base.html. So you can see you actually don't even need to call it base.html. By convention, it usually is called that, but you could have named this whatever you wanted. Then again, I pass in that body block. So here I call block, body _ block. And the indentation is actually not necessary, but it definitely helps with the readability. So I encourage you to try your best to try to keep formatted and readable code. And then it says welcome to index, and we'll say something like, this is index.html page showing. Save that, and then since we have that body block, let's end the block. So here we'll call end block. Save that, and now let's actually run this and see what we get. So we'll say python manage.py, run server, hit enter, make sure we didn't make any mistakes. Okay, so I'm going to copy this and bring it over my browser. And I can see here, I have this nice looking nav bar, and it says, welcome to index. This is index.html page showing. Perfect. Now let's check out the other page. So that was basic app / other. Hit enter, and now it says, welcome to other. This is an example of template inheritance. So note, here my website looks really nice and clear. I have this nav bar showing across all the pages. But right now, if I click on these links, nothing's actually happening. Let's use the URL templates that we learned about in the previous lectures of this section to actually map these to different pages. So let's map brand to the home page, admin to the admin page, and then other to the other page. So we'll come back here, and this is what we're going to do. We're going to come back to base.html, and up here where it said href on the brand, admin, and other, we'll pass in those template tags, those URL templates. So for the brand page, we'll have the index one, and this should feel just like review because we essentially already did all of this in the relative URL templates file. So we'll say URL here, and then just pass in index as a single string for our home page. Then for href, what I'm going to do is this links to the admin page. So remember, I call URL, and then admin : index, and let me make sure I have my quotes in there. So this is all wrapped in single quotes. Remember to be careful with spaces there. And then again, we'll call URL. And in this case, this other page is under my basic app. Remember, I had to set that app name variable, and then it's the name other. So let's save this, bring back our browser and refresh. And if I bring it in, now I can click on the things to take me to brand. take me to other, and I can see as I'm clicking on it, it's taking me, and it really has the feel of a real website now, where there's a nav bar that's taking me to all the pages across the website, and it's calling them using that URL template tagging. And if I click on admin, it's going to take me to the admin page. Now note that the nav bar goes away here because I didn't actually go into admin's HTML file and edit it. And honestly, you shouldn't really be doing that. We'll talk about customizing the Django admin interface, but as far as like styling of the admin and having a nav bar there, that's really not necessary, and that's not really the purpose of the Django administration view. That's more for dealing with your models. But we'll talk about Django admin customization in a future section. Okay, so that's really all we had to cover. Again, the main thing to note here is you'll have a base.html file. Always have this doc type HTML as the first line in your HTML files, no matter if they're base HTML or they're things that are extending that base HTML. But then you have everything you want to be extended across all your pages outside of these two key tags, and that's the block body block and then the end block. You can also have other blocks such as like a head block or whatever you want to call them. And then the relationship between base.html and the other pages is actually very clear. It's essentially just the reverse with one other line. So on other HTML, you get rid of all that HTML besides the doc type. You extend from whatever base.html file you want to reference. Then you call block, in this case body block, because we have body block here. And then whatever you want inside of that, end block. And everything outside is going to be extended, just like the base HTML here. Hopefully this is a pretty straightforward application of template inheritance. All right. Thanks everyone, and I will see you at the next lecture. Welcome to the Templates, Features, and Filters lecture. Before we complete Django Level 4 and our understanding of templates, let's quickly touch upon Django template filters. Imagine that you had some information from your model that you wish to use across various views or pages on your website, but perhaps you wanted to make a slight edit to the information before injecting it, maybe like a string operation or basic arithmetic. For example, maybe on a certain web page you wanted the string to be in all capital letters, but on another web page you just wanted it to be in lowercase. Well, how do you actually deal with that? Luckily, Django provides a ton of easy to implement template filters that allow you to affect the injection before displaying it to the user. And this allows for flexibility from a single source. So you don't have to worry about editing the source on the Python side, you can actually edit it using templates on the website. So the general form of a template filter looks like this. Previously, we just had those set of brackets and then the value we wanted to inject. Here, we can say the value we want to inject, have the pipe operator, that straight line, the name of the filter, and then the parameter that the filter takes in. Now, not all filters take in parameters, and we'll see examples of them as we continue on throughout this section. Many of these filters are based off of common built-in Python functions, so you're already going to be familiar with them, their naming, operations, and what they can actually do. Okay. Let's show you the documentation on them so you can know how to reference all of the various filters. There are a ton of them, so a lot of times you'll just be going to the documentation, seeing which one you need to use, and then copying and pasting from there. Later on, we'll also show you how you can create your own filters. I'm going to jump to the documentation. You can go to this specific link. This is the documentation link for templates for 1.10, this version of Django, or you can just Google search Django plus templates, and it'll probably take you to this page. I'm going to hop over there now. Alright, so here we are at the documentation page for Django templates. And this is a really great reference if you ever have any questions on templates. And as I always mention, the Django documentation in general is really good. So the templates page, it starts off by talking about different support for template engines. By default, we use the Django template language, or DTL. It's more than enough for our use cases, especially if you're just learning Django. As you get more advanced, you could always check out popular alternatives for template engines such as Jinja 2. And this tells you how to connect them, how to download them, etc. So a lot of really useful information here, but what we're going to be concerned about is template filters. So if you come over here on the right-hand side, there should be a link under syntax to filters. You can click on it, and it will show you what filters look like. So as I mentioned, they in general look like this. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here to see the filters. Let me zoom in one more time, scroll back down to the filters, and here they are. Okay. So the filters in general look like this. Remember, we have a context dictionary that is actually calling a key value pair, and then we pass in the key here. That's the actual variable or value we're passing in. Then you have the pipe operator and the name of the filter you want to apply. So in this case, we have Django, where we have a context of Django being the key, and it's attached to the string that's in all lowercase. And then the filter name we're using is called title. And title, if you're familiar with Python string operations, it's also a Python string operation where it basically capitalizes the first letter in every word in a string. So you can see how it converts this to this right here. And as I mentioned, some filters also take an argument or a parameter. And that would look like something like this. So you would say my date, that belongs to some context dictionary, the pipe operator, and then the name of the filter, date, colon, and in a string, whatever argument you're actually passing in. In this case, the format of the date you want to display. And there's a reference for all the built-in filters, as well as instructions for writing your own custom filters. Now, there are so many built-in filters that we don't have enough time in this course to go through them all. Really, what you're going to be doing is clicking on this link and referencing them yourself. But there's also a way to write your own custom filters, which we'll also show you how to do in a future lecture. But that's all we're going to cover for now in this lecture. Coming up next, we're going to talk about just few examples of basic built-in filters, as well as talking about how to create your own custom filters. Thanks, everyone, and I'll see you at the next lecture. To the template filters coding example lecture. In this lecture, we're going to be walking you through the basics of using an actual template filter, and also how you can create your own template filters if you ever feel you have the need to. Django makes all of this really easy, so let's hop right back to the editor and get started. Alright, so I'll be working with the learning_templates project that we've been working through the entire section of this course. It's really easy. All we're going to be doing is affecting the index.html page to actually inject the variables and perform the template filters. But in order to do that, we need some sort of context dictionary to actually pass to this index view. So we'll come over to views.py under basic app, and under index, what we're going to do is create a basic context dictionary. So we'll say context dictionary, and we'll have a couple of keys in here. We'll say some text, and this will be hello world. And then we'll also say number, and this will be something like, let's just make it 100. And we're going to pass that as a context dictionary here. Okay, so save that, and then to make sure it works, on the index page, let's just inject those two variables themselves. So remember, the first one was just called text, and then the second one was just called numbers or number. Let me make sure. Number. Okay, so we'll save that, and let's actually run our server, so python manage.py run server, and call it, make sure that actually there on that index page. So I'm going to copy this, bring over my browser, and bring it in my browser. I can see it right here, hello world and 100. This is actually quite small, so let's enlarge it, bring that away, and let's put this under an h1 tag. So I'm going to actually say, welcome to index, comment that out, and let's make an h1 tag that this will go into. So we'll put the text in an h1 tag, that way we can just clearly see, and I don't have to awkwardly zoom in that far. Copy that, paste that in, save this, I'm refreshing my page, and now I see, welcome to index, hello world, 100. Okay, so what does a typical filter actually look like? Well, the majority of them actually usually don't take parameters or additional arguments. They're usually based off of some sort of Python method that you would call on that basic data type. So if you ever think, oh man, there's a Python method I would like to do on this string, definitely look up the filter reference, at least the built-in ones. It's almost 100% sure to actually be there, already implemented for you. So let's do that with hello world, the text. Let's say I wanted to uppercase all the text. Well, you could use .upper parentheses on a Python string, and it's really no different over here. You just say text, the pipe operator, and then pass in the name of whatever the filter you're using is. And in this case, it's upper. And usually syntax-wise, they're both going to be touching that pipe operator, so you will see it like that without any space. Okay, so let's save that and bring in our page refreshed. So I refresh the page, it's coming in, and now I can see hello world, it's all in uppercase. Now, same with number, it's also a very simple process. Let's show you an example of one that would have an additional argument. For instance, one of the most simple ones is just adding a number. So we can say number, the pipe operator, add is the name of that actual filter, then we say colon, and in a string, you can pass in whatever you want to add. So in this case, let's add the number 99 to it, just to make it really obvious. So we'll save that, refresh our page, and bring it back in. And here, if I bring it back in, I can see it's 199 after the refresh. Okay. Now let's talk about how you can create your own custom filters. Usually, you'll be able to find your own the built-in filters to be more than enough, and sometimes you'll even be doing a lot of this logic on the back end and some other Python script. But let's say you really need to do it with a template and you need your own filter. Well, it's absolutely no problem. Django can certainly handle that. So what you need to do is create a function that will work with that filter. In order to set this all up, we have to follow a convention as far as where to actually place our custom template filters. And what you end up doing is inside your application, at the same level of models and views, essentially what you're going to do is underneath that application, you'll create a new folder or a new directory, and you will call it template tags. And then inside of this, you're going to make sure to create a new file, and you will call it __init__.py. And that file is just going to be totally empty. Basically what this file says is it tells Python to treat this as a module. That way it can call it and load it in. What you're going to be doing usually is creating a new file, and then this is where you're going to actually put in your custom templates. So we can say something like my_extras.py. And now let's show you how you can actually create your own filters. And you can always reference the documentation, just look up Django custom template tags, and this would all be in there. So what you end up doing is first, you need to actually register all of this. So you will say from Django import, and it's going to be template. And then you create an object called register, and you set it equal to template dot, and it's a library. And actually this should be capital L. There we go. So it's register equals template.library. And then what you're going to do is write a function that will be your custom template filter. So we can say def, and let's follow the one that's in the documentation example, such as cut. And this is one that takes in an actual value. So that's whatever the variable or value from your context dictionary you're going to pass, and then any additional argument. So we'll just call that arg. And we'll say what this function does. It's always good to give it a docstring. We'll say this cuts out all values of arg from the string. And then what we're going to do is we'll say return, and we'll grab that value. We're going to assume it's a string. Again, you're going to have to be careful with your kind of assumptions here. And then we'll say arg, and then that. So basically, you can call the .replace method off a Python string, and then pass in what you're looking for, and then what you want to replace it with. This is a really common Python string operation, so we're just kind of putting this whole thing and wrapping it into this nice little custom filter called cut. And then what we need to do is register this. So what we do is over here, we can say register.filter, and I pass in as a string what I actually want to call this filter. So when I call it in my custom filter template tag, we'll just call it cut. And then you have to actually pass in the function itself you just created, which in this case is also cut. So the first one is going to be the string that you call the function when you're using a template tag. The second one is the function itself. So it's not a string, just a direct call to this function. Okay, so that's the very basics, and it's kind of in the order that you're thinking it of. So from Django import template, register, then you create whatever custom template filter, and then here it is. So let's actually try this out now. So coming back to our index.html page, instead of saying text upper, what we're going to do is this. We'll say text, and then we're going to say cut, and then let's cut out the term hello. So I will save this, and let's bring back in our project over here, and if I refresh this, nope, it cut off hello. So that was our own custom filter cut, and it cuts out anything that was placed as a parameter. And that's the very basics of how you can create your own custom filter. Now, as a quick note, there's another way to register the filter itself. So if we come back here under template tags, init, and then my extras, we registered using this register equals template.library. That is one way to do it, but you can also do it with decorators, and it looks a little cleaner. So remember back when we were introducing decorators in the Python level 2 section of the course, I mentioned that later on in Django, I would talk about decorators and then advise you to go back. So this is that time. If you haven't learned about decorators yet, now is the time to go to the decorators lecture, go through it. It's a little complicated, but it'll make a lot more sense when you actually see it here. So I'm going to comment this out, this register.filter. Since I'm passing in essentially what is a function into another function call, I will do this. We can say at register.filter, and then give it the name equal to cut. Save this. And now what we're going to do is, to make sure this all worked, is come back to index, and instead of cutting hello, I'm going to cut world. Save that as well, and then bring in my actual browser, refresh this, and here I see just hello. So world got cut out. And that's how you can use decorators to actually register these custom filters. And this looks kind of a lot nicer and a lot clearer, especially if you already know decorators. All right, so that's it for templates. There's still a lot more you can explore in the documentation, but this should be enough for you to create basically any normal website that you want to work with. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next section of the course.